Welcome back on Dynamod. Today I want to propose you a video about
a series of video about the 9th edition for Warhammer 40k released by the Games Workshop. So in the description you can find also the playlist where you can find all the videos related about the core rules and advanced rules related about this edition. So now we can start to see all the rules that we have to know. So
we can talk about the secondary objectives. These are objectives that can be added to the main one, and each mission usually has a secondary objective specific for that mission. Then you can choose 3 other secondary objectives before obviously to start the game from other 5 sources that are the Battle Supremacy, No Mercy, No Respite, Purge the Enemy, Shadow Operations, and Warcraft. These has different type of objectives that are in different ways. For example, there is the progressive objectives that can be solved only during the game. There are the end game objectives that can be solved only at the end of the game. So you have to see how is the description for each of these objectives, because it can change the way to solve them. What is interesting is that these objectives can accumulate for you a lot of victory points that can solve you gain the game. But at the same time they have a cap limit, that is that you can't gain more than 15 victory points from a single of these secondary objectives. It's quite difficult to gain so many victory points from a single, but there is such cap eventually to remember. Something also to remember is that in the tournaments the way to play them it's a bit different, because it let you take 3 different of these secondary objectives, but you can't repeat it during the tournament itself. So it means that if you plan to use the better one in the first game, you can't use them in the second or third game because you can't repeat them. So try to plan when you are going to fight the tournament how you are going to approximately choose how to distribute the different secondary objectives that you have, because otherwise you risk that you will have problems to conquer and gain so the victory points in the next turn, or bet in the next game of the same tournament. So pay attention eventually to such little details. This is something that has been taken from the General Handbook 2020, and sincerely I like a lot, and more because this it's even a way better than I can say accumulate the victory points and determine the victory itself, instead of only determining as in the General Handbook 2020 about the draw, what it will happen. So I think that it's more interesting this way, so we can go to see them. So we can start from the Purge the Enemy category and Assassinate. In this case, it's an endgame objective, so it counts the total of victory points that you gain at the end of the battle, and you score 3 victory points at the end of the battle for each enemy character keyword that is destroyed. So it becomes really quite interesting, because it's like a hunting game, so it's truly a purging. So you have to pay attention, because you for sure will point to destroy the opponent's character because you need, but at the same time can't be so easy sometimes. So pay attention, because this one it works good with some type of armies and not so good with other enemies in certain armies. So eventually pay attention when you choose these as secondary objective. The second one that we can go to see is Bring It Down, that it's still an end game objective, so it works only at the end for the counting of the points that you have, and it lets you score 2 victory points at the end of the battle for each monster or vehicle with a wound characteristic of 10 or less that is destroyed, and 3 instead points for each monster or vehicles that have wounds characteristic of 11 or more that are being destroyed. So this is quite interesting, but remember that it works really for certain armies and other not. For example, I played for a lot of times armies that didn't have no monsters and no vehicles. It's not so sure because, for example, other times I played a lot of vehicles, so it's really quite dependent by the rooster that you are going to play against. So pay attention when you are going to choose these secondary objectives, because the charters of the previous one can be always found at least one, but this it's more I can say situational, so it's not always that you can find monsters and vehicles in the opponent army eventually. And then we can talk about the next one, that it has two different versions, one from the core rulebook and one from the Grand Tournament 2020. And they are called quite similar because it's Titan Slayers from the core book and it's the Titan Hunter from the Grand Tournament 2020. In this case, anyway, it's quite problematic, but not so much, because for example, in tournaments, if you meet two different Imperial Knights, you could use one before and the other the next time, because you can't, you want to remember, you take more than one objective from the same source, from the same category, and in this case they are both from Purge the enemy, so you can't choose both of them for the same game. And in this case you have that you can collect 10 victory points at the end of the battle phase if you destroyed one model with the keyword Titanic, and this is in common for both the secondary objectives in this case. The thing that changes is that the one from the core book, it makes you gain 15 victory points instead if you destroyed 2 or more of these models with the keyword Titanic. Instead, the one from the Grand Tournament 2020 is 12 victory points if it's 2, and it's 15 it's 3 or more of such Titanic keyword models. Anyway, these are almost specific about having to go against the Imperial Knights because they are Titanic ones. So they are really wonderful to play with these in tournaments because it's a way to double the secondary objectives that you have available eventually. And again, we have another secondary objective that I can say the main effect is similar, but they are called different and they have different way to solve. In fact, we have that in the core rulebook, we have Slay the Warlord, where you gain 6 victory points at the end of the battle if the Warlord is destroyed. Instead, in the Grand Tournament 2020, we have Cut Off the Head, that let you calculate a number of victory points depending on when you killed the Warlord. So, based on the battle round where you killed the Warlord, the opponent Warlord, you gain an amount of victory points that counts from 13 for the first, to 20 for the second, to 6 for the third, 3 for the fourth, and 1 in the case of the fifth battle round. But you have to remember also that if the Warlord was resurrected, it counts when you killed it definitively. So if it's killed or not killed at all really late in the game, you count those victory points or no victory points. So pay attention about such one. Surely these ones are completely different, I can say, secondary objectives. I want to remind you that you can't take both in the case that it's allowed to have both options in the same game because are from the same category. So they become really quite an interesting way to gain points during a tournament or so on, because they can give you the same secondary objects at the end, but having different names, it becomes quite handy. Then we can move to the Battlefield Supremacy category. The first one that we can see is Engage on all fronts. This is a progressive objective, so it means that you realize it during the game and eventually also each turn of the game, so pay attention. In this case, you gain 2 victory points at the end of your turn if you have one or more units from your army wholly within 3 different double quarters, and those units are more than 6 inches from the center of the battlefield itself. Instead, it becomes 3 victory points if you have one or more units of your army wholly within each of the double quarters, not only 3 but all the 4s, and always they have to be more than 6 inches from the center of the battlefield itself. So it's a good way, and it's one of the ways where eventually you can even surpass the amount of the 15 victory points for each secondary object that you can gain, because it depends by the variable duration of the eventually of the game. So pay attention, because this is really quite an interesting one, because it lets you make that if you are able to control, you can really have a lot, because units that can really make some way to move fast or so on, so they can have the option to be in the opponent's quarters and so on. So have a really good control of the field. I think that they are really quite amazing. In this case, it's the perfect secondary objective for really fast army. The next one is line break. In this case, it's a sort of variation of infiltration, of the old secondary objective infiltration. This is a progressive objective, and it's really quite interesting because you can score 4 victory points at the end of your turn if 2 or more, it's the difference because it has to be 2, are, excluding the aircraft, wholly within your opponent deployment zone. So it's really quite good to gain, and this for sure it's a way that you can really quite easily surpass the cap of 15 for the amount of victory points that you obtain with your secondary objectives each one. So in this case, if you are able to stay at least 4 turns in at least with these 2 units in the opponent deployment zone, it's really quite interesting, and it's quite easy to realize such line breaker secondary objectives. So I think that it's one thing that a lot of army will choose, so it will be quite interesting surely, and I think that it's one of the main secondary objectives that you can think about. And then we had Domination, that it's always a progressive objective, and in this case let you score 3 victory points if you control more than half of the total objectives numbers on the battlefield at the end of your turn. So I don't think that it's so easy to control and gain a lot of victory points with this, but surely can be interesting, because if you are deploying in a good way and so on, it can be quite interesting to take the control of the objects or force the opponent to go to stop you, because after that is seen that you have this secondary objective, it try to force you, and maybe you can conquer other secondary objectives using this like a bait. So it can be really quite interesting. And then we can talk about the category No Mercy, No Respite. And the first one that you can see, and it's common of both the core book and the Grand Tournament 2020, it's thin the ranks, where it says that you can keep the kill points, so each model that you can kill, it counts as a point. And then you have also to remember that if the unit that you are going to destroy has 10 or more wounds as single model, it counts as 10 points. And after that you count everything, at the end of the battle you divide everything for 10, and that amount is the amount of points that you can add to your secondary points that you gained from this secondary objective. Remember that is the limit of 15, and remember that if you kill for some reason the same model multiple times, it still counts. So if you count multiple times, for example, because there are marines, because some priest, some apothecary, or some necron that come back, and you kill it again and again, it still count as each time that you kill it. So remember about such thing. So this is really quite interesting and really a good way to gain a lot of points. Moreover, if you are going to play against an army that has a massive type of army, so it can be really quite an amazing one. And then we can go to see one that it's the same about the text, but not amount the name and the victory points that you can gain. In fact, it's Attrition for the core book and Green Them Down for the GT20. The same is that at the end of the battle round, if more enemy units than friendly units were destroyed this turn, this battle round, then you gain 4 victory points for Attrition, so the core book, and 3 instead for Green Them Down for the GT20. I want to remember you that it say battle round, So you have to remember that the battle round is of both your turn and the opponent turn. So pay attention about such detail because it's really quite important, but it's quite an interesting one. Moreover, if you are able to have an army that concentrate in a single turn or the killing, because in that case you'll be able to gain such one quite for sure, but it's not so simply, but quite interesting one. And then we have another common one of both the core book and the GT20, that it's while we stand, we fight. This is an endgame object because we find it at the end of the game itself, because we had to select 3 models with the highest value points. So we have to remember that there is such thing, because it say that it's about models and not unit. I think that there are individual models that you have to take note about. And about those, you have also to consider that the points that are going to be calculated are related about all the models. So the model and includes also the weapons options and so on that are to be included. So take note about this. And this is quite interesting because if you are able to preserve these 3, because you have to choose 3 of such models till the end of the battle, you score 5 victory points for each of these models that has on the battlefield at the end of the battle. So you can reach, if you are able to preserve these 3 models, the maximum of 15 of the points for the secondary objective that you can gain from a single secondary objective. So it can be really quite interesting and quite easy to solve, because you only needed to preserve with only even 1 wound, but still it's a sort of survival about these such models, but surely quite interesting. And then we have one secondary objective that it's only for the secondary objective from the core book, and it's First Strike. This lets you score 5 victory points at the end of the battle if any enemy units were destroyed in the first battle round. So you need only to destroy 1 enemy unit in your first battle round, and then you'll gain, and it can be of both your turn and your opponent turn, because it's a battle round, but it has to be the first. So in that case you are able to gain 5 victory points directly, and if you are able to make more unit of the opponent destroyed than yours in the first battle round, then you gain an additional 3 victory points, so for a total of 8. So it can be really quite interesting. Moreover, for armies that are able to gain a lot of shooting and heavy one in the first turn, can be really quite interesting. So I suggest you to take note about such one, because it's really quite, I can say, a bit unbalanced, but quite interesting. And then we can find the category Shadow Operations. In this case, we can find the actions. So in my video about actions, I said that I was not sure when they will be put up. Now we can find them. So I think that anyway soon we'll see about such ones, not only limited about the secondary objectives, because they can be really quite interesting one. So remember about such detail eventually, because it's really quite important. And the first that is common for both the core book and the GT20 is Investigate Site, that let you score 3 victory points each time a unit from your army successfully complete the action Investigate. What does it does, this action? It lets you select 1 infantry unit, excluding characters, from your army, and can start to perform this action at the end of your movement phase. So at least you can do that, you can move in the position, but after that you select to do such action, you can do anything else. So remember that you can't even shoot in. So this, if you are able to stay still and you are not enemy units excluding aircraft within 6 inches at the center of the battlefield, the action is completed at the end of your turn. So it means that it's quite easy to perform such action. Moreover, you can do multiple times, because you can select more units to do such action, so that you are able to make more points in a singular turn and so on. So it's quite easy, but also means that those units will be still. And remember that you can't gain these ones if you have made the advance or the falling back. So remember that there are a lot of ways to restrict such ones as options, but it can be really quite interesting if you are able to control. In a table where there is a shiny element that it's in the center, maybe it's even easier, because you can finish this one and have some protection from the opponent unit in the next turn. Obviously it's better even more if you are able to be the second in the battle round, so that at least you are sure that you have some gain, and eventually you can try to gain such points at the end of the battle. So when you are going to approach to the end, you can try to gain such ones if you are able to save some units and do such option as a secondary objective. So it can be really quite strategically one. And then we have one that is again similar but different in the core book and GT20. In this case, they change the name and the points again, but the thing is the same. So for the core book, it's 5 victory points and it's called Repair Teleport Homer. For the one that is from the GT20, it's Teleport Homer only, and only 4 victory points. In this case, you are able to gain this victory point if you are able to complete the action Repair. In this case, one infantry unit from your army can start to perform this action at the end of your movement phase if it's wholly within your opponent's deployment zone. But the action is completed at the end of your next command phase, provided that the unit attempting it is still wholly within your opponent's deployment zone. And I want to remember you that it means that okay, you moved to arrive there, okay. Remember that you can't advance as usually and you can't fall back to reach that point. But it means that you can't shoot, you can't do anything till your next end command phase. So it's quite heavy as thing, so it's not so easy to do because you are in the opponent deployment zone, so it's not quite easy to reach such one. Surely it's quite interesting, but it's not at all easy, so pay attention if you select this one as one of the secondary objects that you want to reach, because it's something that it's a bit tricky to be able to realize. And then we have one that it's common of both the core book and the GT20, and it's raise the banner high. In this case, we have to pay attention to the structure, because we can make only infantry units to do such secondary objectives, and they can do declaring the action at the end of the movement phase. So remember again that you can't advance and you can't fall back and activate this option. So you select one objective that you are close to, and you can raise the banner on that objective. In that case, the action is completed at the end of your turn. So you have raised this banner, but the points coming from the next turns. So only from the second turn when you raised such one in the command phase, you gain another victory point for such secondary objective. So remember that it means that if, for example, it's the first turn you control and you raise, you can't do and gain anything else in that turn. Then you can move aside because you raised the banner, and then that one in the command point gain in the second turn of yours that you raised, so the point. So remember that you can't gain directly, so it's something that is progressive. The advantage is that after you have done this, you can move around and simply take them freely. But remember also that if the opponent comes to control such objectives, you lose the banner, so simply you fall back to gaining the no victory points for that objective. So remember about this. And in this case anyway, remember that the aircraft are not counted. Moreover, at the end of the battle, you can gain another victory point for each one of the objects that are zero banner on. So it's really quite interesting. Remember that you have a limit of 15 ones that you can gain, because it can happen that you are able to control more objects and so on, and so gain more points than the maximum limit. But remember also that it's not so easy. It's not so difficult, but you have to pay attention that you have to gain, lose, and maybe gain again. And anyway, remember that you have a limit about when you can gain the points, the victory points for such secondary objects. Anyway, it's not bad at all. And then we have one secondary object that it's only for the GT 2020, and it's the press canvas. Remember that this time you had to do this 3 times the same action, and in 3 different places, because once you had to do in your opponent deployment zones, once in your own deployment zones, and one either your deployment zone or the opponent's ones, you can choose, but more than 6 inches from the limit of the deployment zones. So it's quite interesting one, because you have to remember that you can do only with one unit this time this action. So okay, you do, and at the end of the turn it's okay, but it means that that unit can't do anything for that turn, and you can't do this action at the same time multiple times. So you have to do for 3 turns to realize such secondary objectives. So it's not so easy, it's even not so difficult, but you have to pay attention, because it can be quite interesting. And then we had the Warcraft, where we can find psychic actions. So remember that only psychers can do and follow the same rules for the psychic powers, but if they do so, they can't use and can't do anything about psychic powers. So remember about such limitation when you are going to select, and remember that they are limited to psyker keywords once. And the first one that we can find is mental interrogation, and it's common of both the two books that we are going to analyze, and let you score 3 victory points each time you successfully complete the following psychic action: mental interrogation, that it's a psychic action with warp charge 4. So one of your psychic characters from your army can attempt to perform this psychic action in your psychic phase if it is within 18 inches of any enemy character models. So it means that you have to be in a certain range from characters of the enemy, and you have to make the action that it's a warp charge 4. So to do such one, you have also to roll dice. So remember that you can risk, so value if it's worth or not. But it's also true that it's quite easy to gain more if you, for example, have some psychic powers and so on that are not useful for you to use in some way. So anyway, they can be quite interesting. The next one is Psychic Ritual, that it's common to both the monuments again, and let you score 15 victory points at the end of the battle if any unit from your army successfully complete the Psychic Ritual Psychic Action Warp Charge 3. So it's not quite difficult, but I want to remember you that the problem is that there are psychic powers and they can't be used again. But remember that to complete such one psychic character unit from your army can attempt to perform this psychic action in your psychic phase if it is within 6 inches of the center of the battlefield. So it means that you are in the middle of everything, so it's not so easy but not so difficult, and you sacrifice your psychic phase to do such thing. So remember about such. So it becomes really quite interesting. Maybe you could try to use that you can attempt for different psyches in the same turn to do, so that you can gain, but I think that it's a bit problematic to realize such thing anyway, because usually, except some particular type of armies, you don't have such a great amount of psyches, and having all of them in the same place, it's not a good idea, I say. Anyway, can be quite interesting and in some way easy to realize. And then we have Abhor the Witch, that it's only for the core book, and you can't select this secondary objective if you have any psyker in your army. So pay attention that you have to be free of psykers about, and you score 5 victory points at the end of the battle for each psyker character's unit that is destroyed, and 3 for units that are not charters but are still psychers. So it can be really quite interesting against certain armies that have a lot of psychers inside. So it can be quite interesting. But remember that you have some quite heavy prerequisites. So you don't have any psyker to gain such secondary objects available. So pay attention. And then we have Pierce David, that it's only for the Grand Tournament 2020. In this case, we had that we can score 8 victory points at the end of the battle if one or more units from your army successfully completed the following psychic action twice or more times during the battle, or 15 victory points at the end of the battle if one or more units from your army successfully completed the following psychic action 4 times during the battle itself. Note that you can only score these objectives once, obviously, and this one is to cast this psychic veil, that is a psychic action with a warp charge 4, and to do this you have to have one psychic character unit from your army that can attempt to perform this psychic action during your psychic phase if it is within 6 inches of the opponent battlefield edge and more than 6 inches from any enemy model. So you have before to bring your model in that range and then to save it for at least 2 or even more turns from the opponent units. So it's not quite easy to do so. I think that in this case it's quite difficult to realize such one, at least the 15 version. Maybe the one that it's for the 8 victory points that recast to do this twice, it's not difficult. But pay attention about this because it can be problematic. So to say about the secondary objects, I think that they are really quite amazing. I hope that some of them will become even main, so primary objectives, because I think that there can be really quite interesting and can be even a sort of mission completely, because they are really quite fun, some of them, to realize. Some of them instead has to be adjusted a bit because they're quite a bit based on what you're going to go against, but they are really quite interesting, and moreover in tournament where you can choose which one you can select, that can be really quite a good way to see how you'll go to create your options. So I think that they are really quite amazing one. So from Dynamod it's everything. I invite you to put a like on this video, to subscribe to the channel, to ring the bell, and to comment this video if you are interested in something about this video or you want to suggest me some arguments for other videos. I hope to see you again to the next time.